What is the definition of radiation processing? One definition that I like is that it is the intentional exposure to ionizing radiation, and the word ionizing is important, in order to achieve a certain effect. And that includes, for example, inspection, the kind that you have in airport, where they use X-ray to scan luggage. That excludes medical imaging and medical application, which are not in the scope of radiation processing or IA. Irradiation is slightly different. It's simply exposure to radiation. So, as we know, there are many types of radiation. The sun, radiation from the sun, microwave, infrared radiation used to keep the meals warm in cafeterias. But here we will be talking only about ionizing radiation. So what are the three types of ionizing radiation that are used for radiation processing? One is gamma irradiation from a radioactive source, so namely cobalt-60. A second type of radiation is electrons, accelerated electrons produced by a machine called an accelerator. And the third is X-rays that are produced from electron coming from an accelerator and going through a metal target to produce X-ray. And we will go into more details about this. So which one is most used or which one is best is a difficult question. There is no best technology. In this table here, you have a comparison and you see they are quite different in nature, and really the key is to see what you have to process and choose the best suited of this ionizing radiation accordingly. So though I would say there are battles about which technology is better, there is no better technology really. All are good, all are needed, and all are used. So gamma radiation has been established for a long time now. So it's made of photons, and these photons are produced by the decay of a cobalt-60 source, which is man-made. Every time there is a decay of one atom of cobalt-60, two photons are produced. These photons, having no mass and no electrical charge, have a good penetration power in matter, so products can be processed by bags, drums, cartons, or even full pallets. However, the dose rate, the quantity of energy that is emitted per time unit, is rather slow, and the order of magnitude is kilograms per hour. We will come into the unit right after. Electrons are produced by electric power. So the advantage is that electric power is produced anywhere, can be found anywhere in the world. And by switching off the machine, the accelerator, the emission of electrons can be paused, which is not the case, of course, with a radioactive source. It's a natural phenomenon, so it cannot be interrupted. The energy of the electrons need to be high enough to penetrate far enough into matter. However, altogether, the penetration is rather poor, so that electrons are used mostly for lower density products or packages that are not too thick. One big advantage of electrons is their dose rate. The amount of energy per time unit is the order of kilograms per second, meaning that the process is very fast. Finally, X-rays, so they are produced also by accelerators, where the electrons go through a metal target and become photons, and they being photons, they have a very good penetration and can also treat products by full pellets. The energy usually ranges from 0.3 to 7.5 million electron volt, and so their penetration is very good. And the dose rate, so the speed of processing, is intermediate between gamma and sec and electrons, so of the order of kilograms per minute. Okay, switch next slide here. So why ionizing radiation is because all this radiation induce ionization in matter. What does that mean? It is that either the incident photon or the electron will kick out electrons out of the orbit of the atom. So when you remove an electron, you produce an ion. And the reaction will spread a little bit like balls on a pool table. From these ions, a number of changing modification will happen within the molecules with the creation of a very reactive species called radical. So for the beginners, I want to clarify these different words when you read the newspaper, magazines, etc. It's awful how the different notions are confused. So we've been talking about irradiation here, and there is no radioactivity created. Simple explanation is that the ionizing radiation will affect only the electrons, so not the nucleus itself, and it will not destabilize the atom, so it will not make the product radioactive. This has nothing to do with radioactive contamination. There is no transfer of radioactivity in the product, and there is no emission of radiation from within the product after irradiation. And finally, it has nothing to do with radioactivation, so the creation of a radioactivity in the product, which happens only with particular types of radiation. Neutrons, for example, can achieve this. And again, there it's mostly because the nucleus will be affected and not only the electrons, as in the case of the irradiation with the ionizing radiation that we're talking about. So make sure to understand that irradiation does not mean contamination, and it does not mean radioactivation. Simply said, irradiation is a transfer of energy. So the source of radiation emits energy, the radiation transports the energy, and the product being treated will absorb the energy. The key unit there is the quantity of energy that is absorbed. So for this, there is a specific unit called the gray, and the gray is simply an energy of 1 joule absorbed by 1 kilogram of matter. This dose is a very critical parameter, the key parameter actually for radiation processing. So you will hear dose a lot. It's important because the effects on products of upon irradiation are linked to the dose. The higher the dose, the more effects there will be on the product, whether chemical, biological, or others. The dose is very convenient because it is used to characterize the process, to specify it, and also to control it. So you will check that, say, the job was properly done by verifying the dose. Most commercial applications are using doses in a range of, let's say, 0.1 at the very lowest to up to 100 kilograms and beyond, depending on application. For example, in the case of polymer modification, the doses can be quite high. Like with all physical measurement, measuring the dose implies a level of uncertainty. So you cannot really know exactly what the dose was with the means that we have actually. And this is about the art of measuring the dose, the science, or a little the black magic sometimes of measuring the dose is called dosimetry. So dosimetry is not only the dosimeter, so the little instruments that are used to measure the dose, and this is generally based on the chemical modification, a chemical reaction of the dosimeter. For example, a film or a small piece of plastic that will have a known change upon irradiation at a certain dose, but it's also the instruments that are used to measure the dose and the procedures that go along with it. There is no perfect dosimeter, and because all dosimeters will be influenced by some environmental factor, such as temperature, oxygen, humidity, time after irradiation. So there is always a level of uncertainty on the dosimetry reading, and when the dose is stated, it should always be accompanied with the uncertainty on the measurement. This is one example of a dosimeter, a classic dosimeter. It's the perspex dosimeters that is based on the change of color of a piece of polymethyl methacrylate. And so it's possible to measure the dose by measuring the change in color on absorbance with a spectrophotometer. One of the most popular dosimeters now is, and probably one of the best, could even say the best, is the alanine dosimeter that has become quite popular even for routine control of radiation processing. Two other units are frequently used when we discuss radiation processing. The one is a unit of energy that is adapted to the technology, is the electron volt, the energy acquired by an electron in a field of 1 volt. And if you see an electron volt, it's a very small quantities of joules. So most of the accelerators used in the industry will work in the range of 100 keV or 0.1 million electron volt to 10 million electron volt. And a unit that is specific to cobalt-60, so for gamma radiation, is the activity unit that measures the number of decays per second. The activity, the unit is the Curie, and historically it was the number of decays in 1 gram of radium Ra-226. The official unit is the becquerel. It's much more simple because it's simply 1 decay per minute, but you see that 1 Curie is 3 times 10 to the power 10 becquerels, meaning that this becquerel unit has very little relationship with the natural radioactivities. Commercial irradiators contain somewhere between 0.3 to 6 million curies of cobalt-60. So if you multiply 6 million by 10 to the power 10, that's a lot of decays per second in a commercial irradiator. Now, the lower limit is quite arbitrary, but when you count the number of irradiators in the world, usually you set the lower limit at 0.3, considering that under there are more for research irradiator or at best semi-commercial facilities. Let's have a look now at the long history of radiation processing. And you can arbitrarily split it in three periods. It starts in the late 19th century and up to right after the war. You could call it the time of scientists, because it's when the discoveries that led to the tools, the machines, the sources, and the application that we use today. So it was, let's say, the fundamental work. And a lot happened, as always, during the war. The war stimulates innovation for better or for worse, but technologically there was a lot of innovation around the Second World War. And after the war, you know that we enter the nuclear age, unfortunately, by the wrong end with the military application. But there is also implication for the production of energy and the development of nuclear industry, including the development of radiation process. After the war, we have also the advent of plastics. Very difficult for us now to imagine a world without plastics, and we all know that actually we have too much plastics. Our oceans are full of it, but think of the revolution that it was when all this product, starting interestingly with the disposable dishes and plates, etc. Plastic made life easier in many ways, procuring easy to use and disposable products. So from the 1950s, the knowledge is there, the main tools are there, are being developed, and then comes the times of engineers, really, with the first commercial facilities, little by little, starting mostly in North America and in Western Europe. So the time of engineers, because I knew a few of them, they were very passionate generally about their technology, one technology rendering them very often hostile to other technologies. So many of them are at the origin of the first, let's say, business in one country or another, offering irradiation services or adapting radiation processing for the product that their company was manufacturing. And from the 80s, time will change. It's going to be a lot less romantic than it was before. The time of pioneers is finished, and then comes the time of businessmen. The process is starting to find its place. So the radiation processing capacity will increase, more facilities being created in all parts of the world, and the radiation industry will become a multi-billion-dollar industry. So something that is really important now, though it is still largely unknown from the general public. So who is at the origin of the technology? Well, there are more than these 6 people who are named here, but all of them had a fundamental contribution. We can start with the English William Crookes, who investigate cathode rays and invent the Crookes tubes that you could call a far ancestor to electron accelerators. Then the Swiss Wilhelm Röntgen discovered X-ray in 1901, and we know how important X-ray. Interestingly, the medical application of X-rays came very, very quickly after their discovery. Henri Becquerel, Pierre and Marie Curie in France discover radioactivity. And then we're talking mostly of radium. And again, it's only after the Second World War that radionuclides will become available. And the cobalt-60 that we are using today actually is a product of the artificial radioactivity. So creating an element that does not exist in nature. And this would not have been possible without the discovery of Irene and Frédéric Joliot-Curie in 1934. All these people on these pictures here have received the Nobel Prize. At the origin of radiation processing application here, I only name a few because there are many applications, as we will see. And we cannot name them all, and actually we don't know them all. For some, say, secondary application, we don't really know where it came first. Certainly in the case of polymer modification, it's quite clear. Arthur Charlesby in England was really the man who opened the era of radiation chemistry by discovering that radiation could cross-link polyethylene, and the commercial application also followed very soon after, especially in the US. Radiation sterilization of medical devices, well, it's a long story actually, and first you had to, who thought of sterilizing medical devices? Well, it was a new idea in 1886 when this Mr. von Bergmann in Germany was the first to sterilize surgical instruments using heat, of course, in that time. And in 1904, it was an American microbiologist, Samuel Prescott, who did a lot of work on processing of food sterilization, canning in particular, who discovered the bactericidal effect of ionizing radiation. So these are some sort of a way the fathers of radiation sterilization. Then comes the time of engineers, those who are going to put this new knowledge into practice. Paul Cook in the US created a company called Raychem Wire and Cable that later became Raychem, and this was putting at work the discovery of Arthur Charlesby a few years before, so for the production of wire and cable insulation. And this company still exists today and is quite prosperous. Down the line of people who were involved in the invention of radiation sterilization, we will find Charles Ertandy, someone working for Johnson & Johnson, who created the first gamma irradiator. It was an in-house facility to sterilize surgical sutures. So in a gamma irradiator located in Somerville, New Jersey, that still exists today and still operating. The first gamma irradiation service center was created by a French named Pierre Vidal near Lyon in France, and it was really the first private commercial service center for radiation processing. Of course, the facility was quite simple. Getting cobalt-60 in 1958 was not easy. It came mostly from Canada, but the quantity were very small and the price was quite high. But it's interesting to note that, let's say, the design of gamma irradiators came really from the nuclear industry and has not changed much over the last decades. And today, a gamma irradiator still looks pretty much like a gamma irradiator of 1960. A man that is often forgotten is Bill Baird. Bill Baird is those who have a turkey for Thanksgiving should have a thought for Bill Baird, because the turkey is generally wrapped in a shrink film, and this was really developed by Bill Baird in the company that later became Grace Cryovac. And it is said, it's difficult to check, but Grace Cryovac is probably the company in the world having the largest number of in-house accelerators for various applications to food packaging. Some of us I see in the audience met Marshall Cleland, who passed away just a few years ago, and Marshall invented a DC accelerator, a direct current accelerator called the dynamitron, that has really been the workhorse in the cable industry. So low, medium energy accelerator that became popular. And I will finish with Yves Henon from Belgium. Yves Henon is really with another guy called Michel Abs, working both from IBA, company that they founded, is really the father of Rhodotron, definitely the most innovative accelerator in the past 30 to 40 years, and that is now very commercially successful around the world. Then came the time of businessman, once industry had adopted irradiation. So two types of irradiation facilities, some in-house, especially for polymer enhancement or medical sterilization. So on the premises of manufacturing companies. And another market, let's say, was contract facilities for those who did not have enough volumes to process, not enough at least to justify having their own facility. So a business of contract services for irradiation developed across the world. Initially, it was often one engineer or a small company creating one facility in one country. But soon some companies went out of their borders and started to have a collection of irradiation facility in a given geographic area. This happened in Western Europe. This happened in North America, especially. Then we saw an incredible number of mergers and acquisitions around 2000 and up to, let's say, recently, though this has slowed down a bit. So, which really led to a concentration of contractors. So we now have in the world major players such as Steris, Steris AST based in the US with a large number. I lost track of how many facilities in how many countries they have, but a lot. Sterigenic, a part of Sotera Health. Another major player would be JPY in China, though its characteristic is that it is operating in China only. And then Unisos in France, who recently acquired quite a number of irradiation facilities outside France. So let's go back now to the status of the sources of ionising radiation. So sources, generator. It's difficult to use a name that is really suited for both. Gamma irradiation is a mature technology, we can say. The huge advantage of this technology is that it is simple and very robust. Gamma irradiators don't break down. You rely on the decay of a radioactive element, and you can take it for granted. This was not the same with the accelerators that for quite some time had reliability issues. They were rather complex machines. Originally, they had very much been in the hands of scientists because they were research tools, but this has totally changed over the past year. Accelerators have become much more reliable than they were in the past, and manufacturers have gone through considerable efforts, and we must pay tribute to them for making them a lot more user-friendly, simple and user-friendly that they used to be. So as opposed to the field of gamma irradiators, the field of accelerators manufacturing, it is very innovative. There is a lot of changes, and definitely continuous improvement is at work in this field. X-rays is, you could still call it an emerging technology, though it's less and less true. I think it's really finding its place, especially under the influence of the major players, Teris, AST, who has considerably invested in accelerators capable of producing X-rays and really promoting the technology, especially toward the medical device manufacturers. There is a lot of studies going on effects of material, etc., to encourage the use of X-rays. Again, I want to repeat that there is no better technology. All of them have their place. All of them are needed. If you look only at the field of medical sterilization currently, the number one problem is capacity. The market is growing very much, and offer cannot cope with demand. So there are other methods of to sterilize medical devices. For example, ethylene oxide, which is so very important technology. Probably half of medical devices in the world are treated with medical devices. It's also a technology that has its problem, but it's also very needed, and we don't want to imagine that one of these technologies will no longer be available, because that would create a disaster for the availability of the sterile medical devices that we all need. Let's talk a bit about gamma irradiators. So these are very bulky facilities. Radiation kills. So next week I will talk a bit about radiation technology, but you probably know already that radiation kills, so you have to be careful and handle them properly. They are not so more dangerous than other technologies. I was mentioning ethylene oxide, you know, it's also dangerous. The gas is toxic, it's cancerous, it's mutagenic, it's carcinogenic, it explodes, etc. But still, it's very useful, and if handled in properly, it's not more dangerous than any other industrial activity. So the first thing that appears in a gamma irradiator is a bunker in which there is the source. You can go inside this bunker, nothing is radioactive. So if you want to go inside, just make sure that you are shielded from the source. And the most common way to do this is to send the source at the bottom of a pool, you see in blue at the bottom. And then the layer of water on top of the source will protect you from radiation when you enter the irradiation. And then all your irradiators are based on the same principle. You will have a conveyor system, more or less so complex, that carries the products to the irradiation room where the source is, so raised in the the operating position when you need it, and you try to surround this source. In case of gamma, it goes in all directions. So you want to try to put as much volume of product as possible around the source so that a maximum of the emitted radiation is absorbed, and around it a number of safety and auxiliary systems. This is a representation of the source. The cobalt-60 source is really a small piece of metal. These pieces of metal are put inside tubes, the tubes on smaller frame, and this smaller frame on a bigger frame, and that is what goes up and down, whether you want to use the source or not. Very different are laboratory irradiators. Maybe some of you use these. So generally, there is no pool. The activity is much smaller, and this is meant for the irradiation of samples, and still very common around the world in a number of research centers and universities. How many gamma irradiators around the world? Probably somewhere around 230, most in China, though the largest quantity of cobalt-60 is in the US. Recently, there are less gamma irradiators being built. It's more difficult to get a license. But those that are, India is probably the country where there are the most new gamma irradiators. Nordion says that there are about 400 million of curies of cobalt-60 installed around the world, so most in the US and most in contract facilities. And medical sterilization and food irradiation and a few other applications are really the applications where gamma irradiation is dominant. There are a number of challenges facing gamma irradiation, but again, I would say that, as I said before, other technologies also have their challenges. But certainly, one of the problems of gamma irradiation is the availability of cobalt-60, because there is one leader, one very dominant supplier in the world, and in the recent years, the offer has not followed demand due to the growth, in particular, of the demand for medical sterilization. Of course, the prices are increasing also. The terrorist threats makes it also more difficult, more complicated than before to transport sources or to get a license for new gamma irradiators in different countries. And finally, there is the issue of disposal, which is a bit unclear, though let's put the problem in perspective. All the cobalt that has been used since, say, 1960 needs a very small place. So it's not the same magnitude as, let's say, nuclear waste from power plants. Electron accelerators now, very different technology. So as I said, using electricity, the principle is to, say, pull electrons from a filament and give them energy, impart them energy through different systems, devices, direct current, radio frequency, etc., and obtain a beam that will come out through this horn there, and with a magnet that will make it oscillate so that the product goes under and is swept by the beam at a very high frequency. So electron accelerators are characterized by their energy, and it's the energy that will determine the penetration inside the product and their power. And the power is the characteristic that will determine the throughput, how fast you can process products at a given dose. Traditionally, they are also categorized by their energy level, so more or less arbitrary between low energy, medium energy, and high energy. Many different types of accelerators were designed and used since the early 20th century, used in laboratories. For example, the Van de Graaff accelerator is an old type of electrostatic accelerator that was used very much in lab and to a very limited extent in industry. But if we look at the main machines that are being used nowadays, you would probably fall into one of these three categories. The first one, the dynamitron, for example, that you see on the top right, is one that is very common for cable and wires industry. Linear accelerators are used for different applications, including medical sterilization and all sorts of other applications. So linear, why? Because you see it's straight, and so you start from one end with the electron and you accelerate it, and it comes to the other end in a straight line. Now, the rhodotron, as I said earlier, has been really innovative. You have a recirculation of the electron in the shape of a flower, let's say a rose, and hence the name rhodotron. And again, it's a very new concept and incredibly innovative. And one of the characteristics of the rhodotron that makes it rather unique is its possibility to have very high energy and very, very high power. Electron beam facility, where like for gamma, you try to have the product going as smartly as possible toward the source. So there you see two accelerators, one irradiating from the top, one from the bottom. So because of the limited penetration, it's interesting to irradiate from both sides of the carton without having to flip it. So the beauty of electron is certainly that they are a fast process, so allowing very high throughput. Of course, the possibility of switching them off. Polymer modification is really the realm of electron accelerators, and there are in excess of 3,000 in operation around the world. But there again, it's very difficult to say which one are used for what, if it's industry, research, etc. The number of suppliers is larger than for sources of cobalt-60. That's interesting, but let's say that recently there has been really a dominance of manufacturers located in Canada and in Europe in particular. It's used in-house. It's rather easy to integrate in an existing manufacturing site. And I will say, and people are going to jump on me, but it's okay. It's probably the lower cost per treated unit because it's a rather, in terms of energy efficiency, it's a rather efficient process. So, and given the high throughput, you can come to a very low cost per treated unit. X-rays now, well, we're not very far. You still need an accelerator, and a rhodotron is a good idea for it. You put under the window, you're going to insert a metal target, preferably with a high atomic number. So you're thinking of tungsten, of gold, and one splits out my mind, but it's okay. So, and what happens is that the electrons that are produced by these electron accelerators will very quickly, on a very short distance, decelerate and produce what the German call Bestrahlung, so the emission of X photons. Most of the energy, unfortunately, will be dissipated into in the form of heat, hence the necessity to cool the target. And what you put in as energy initially into the beam, well, there is very little left when you produce X-ray. So this is called the conversion rate, and it's really low. So energetically, it's quite inefficient. But it's interesting because really X-rays have the advantages of gamma. So electric machine that you can switch off, penetration power without the disadvantages, no handling of radioactive material, and the possibility to pause the emission of radiation. This is one example of X-ray facility built by IBA. You see here pallets turning in front of the beam. So what you see is the scanning horn, so as to irradiate the pallet as uniformly as possible. So in the case of X-ray, we have penetration that is comparable or even better than gamma. So the conversion, the energy efficiency is a bit problematic. And this is coming of age probably only now because of the availability of machines that have high power and with high energy, because the conversion will be improved as the energy of the electron increases. So let's say 10 MeV is good for the accelerator, and since you get so little at the end, you need a lot of power to the machine to make it to make it practical when you use it industrially. There is now a lot of research done on the effects of X-rays on material. Globally, it's the same as for gamma. However, it's not so easy. If you have been irradiating product with one modality, say gamma or E-beam, switch to X-ray for a medical manufacturer in particular will require that you revalidate, that you register the product again. The number of X-ray facilities available around the world is not that large yet, and there is, generally speaking, a bit of a risk aversion with comfort in the common routine that makes the switch to X-ray more problematic than the manufacturer would like. But the current issues with cobalt-60 supply probably encourage a number of manufacturers to consider X-rays for new products in particular. I want to finish this quick review with a few words on low energy electrons and X-rays. Something new, really, something that has been overlooked for many years. And for example, with the availability of this lamp, like you see at the bottom right, the metal ceramic lamps producing electrons or X-rays, it becomes more feasible. The advantage, of course, is that low energy, it means you don't require a bunker. You can have a rather simple shielding, and we are seeing low energy electron, for example, coming into the industry. The company Tetra Pak, a specialist of aseptic filling, now offers machines that includes where the traditional treatment by hydrogen peroxide has been replaced by low energy electrons. Same in the biopharma industry, where tubs containing pre-filled syringes are sterilized with low energy beams. And finally, the most recent is a machine proposed by Bühler. You see, it's a bit a bit bigger than the refrigerator in your kitchen, and it is designed to decontaminate food ingredients. So very different from, of course, having to carry your spices, for example, to your nearest contract facility. Now, time will be up soon, so quick review of the main applications. The main application is not very visible. There is a lot of proprietary information, and it's really enhancement of polymers. The applications are numerous, and we don't know them all. It's not public information. Of course, we know that the main application is for cable and wires used in a number of different industries. And the interesting things about irradiation is that without addition of chemicals, it will increase the resistance to high temperature, to solvents, etc. So it's used in a number of different industry, but it's also used for piping, for different foams used in cars, for example, for heat shrinkable tubes and so forth. Medical sterilization is what people are a bit familiar with. Yeah? So it's a very well-established technology governed by standards that are not discussed. There is real harmonization. I would say, it's amazing when you think you compare to food irradiation, where we could not agree internationally on we should do it or not and how. There, for medical devices, there is absolutely no problem. Everyone looks at the ISO 11137 standards, which is the international norm. Radiation sterilization is the main market for contract irradiation facilities in most countries, with maybe the exception of China, because it seems that there is more food than medical devices treated in contract facility in China. And this is an application that has been steadily growing over the years since the 1970s, and the COVID episode, etc., increased the demand. The medical devices would also include labware, petri dishes and personal protection equipment, etc. So the demand has been increasing. Food irradiation. It's difficult for me to be positive about food irradiation, because it has been, like for many other people, such a long series of disappointment. The uptake by the industry has been slow. What is treated, it's mostly spices in a number of countries and a number of niche applications, but a lot of difficulties. And I do not believe, it's often said that the consumer, the problem is the consumer knowledge of acceptance. I don't think that's really the core of the problem. I believe that regulators are really a problem. We were not able to achieve harmonization, though international organizations said that it was absolutely safe. And I think the number one priority would be also to convince retailers to put irradiated products on their shelves. But this has not happened very often. So food irradiation is not what it could be, unfortunately, because it could be a great contribution to food safety, microbiological safety in particular, though I don't really believe very much in food irradiation contributing to food safety and putting an end to hunger in the world. It seems to me that irradiation might not be the first thing to do when you want to improve food security. Another interesting application, though, is the use of irradiation as a phytosanitary measure for fresh produce. This is food irradiation, actually. And it's amazing how well it has grown over the past, not even 2 decades yet, you know. What is the volume traded? Well, it's still small, probably somewhere around 80,000 tons around the world, with Mexico and Australia at the forefront. And there it replaces chemical treatments, many pesticides that have been banned. They were used to kill various insect pests, so prevent their spread in the countries of the destination. And this is working well. And it shows again that consumers do buy irradiated food, because you see this guava here that you can find, Mexican guavas you can find in US supermarkets. There is no problem of consumer acceptance, really. So why did it work for when it's phytosanitary measure, and why is not even offered when it is for pathogen, for example, against pathogen? So there would be a lot to say around this. It goes with the labeling issues. Should there be a label or not? So there has been a lot of debates around food irradiation for sure over the past 50 years. One application that is not much talk about, but very important in volumes, is the use of irradiation for packaging. Packaging used in food, in particular those packages such as this bag you see on the right. They're a big bag for juice, for milk, or for tomato paste. So in order to sterilize them, basically, or all these small packaging unit for pharmaceutical and cosmetics. So this is quite substantial volumes being processed by irradiation. Environmental application have been also discussed for many years now, decades. For example, the purification of flue gas by electron beam, very interesting application. Technically, there is no problem, or all problems can be solved. It's interesting. You can reduce the emission of SOx, NOx, or dioxins in incinerators. A few prototypes were built in Japan, in Poland, and in other countries. Also, the treatment of wastewater by electron beam. It seems that facilities are being built, have been built, and are still being built in China for this application, while India is using gamma irradiation to what they call hygienize dry sludge, and after make fertilizer, etc., that can be used by farmer. Well, the problem of environmental application to this day is that really the economic viability still has to be established. People are not yet ready, it seems, to really pay for clean air, clear water, clean land. And until this does not happen, it's not sure that environmental application using irradiation will have the place that they could have. I want to finish by mentioning a few other applications. I will not dwell on them, just to give a small sample of the diversity of application of irradiation, and I'm sure they're still coming and there will be more in the future. So really, radiation processing makes a great, benefits millions of lives around the world, though it is in the background and still, as I said, largely unknown to the public, to the general public. So in conclusion and in summary, radiation processing, it's a prosperous industry. not a new one because it has, as you saw, already a long history. Gamma has been there for many years, and I'm absolutely sure that it will be there for many years ago, because even if it's under pressure now, it's simple, it's effective, it's very reliable. Electron beams, it's growing, and we can understand why, and I'm sure that there will be more and more accelerators in the coming years. X-rays are beautiful, but to this day they are quite expensive and they are new. And as for all new technologies, there is a number of hurdles to be overcome before they conquer a significant place. Let's not forget low energy electron and X-ray. We've seen a number of developments. It really brings irradiation to the manufacturing places, like electron did to a certain extent. Electron beams did for polymer modification. But I am personally a firm believer in the future of low energy E-beam and X. A number of well-established applications that do not need advocating, and 2 applications that have not yet taken off, unfortunately. And maybe I think I bring this to the association. Could the association have a role in promoting food irradiation and environmental application, because they have potentially a lot of benefits also for humankind, like radiation processing in general. With this, I conclude my presentation, and I thank you for your attention.